Welcome to ACR On Air, the official podcast of the American College of Rheumatology, where we have engaging conversations with leading rheumatology professionals on topics such as the latest research on rheumatic diseases, solutions for addressing practice management issues, legislative policies impacting patient care, and more. Here's your host.
Welcome back to another episode of ACR On Air, the official podcast of the American College of Rheumatology. I'm your host, Dr. John Hausman. Show notes for this episode can be found at acronair.org. You can also find our previous episodes on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcast, and on your favorite podcast app. I've always loved technology. When I was a kid, my dad bought an Apple IIc computer. I remember writing short stories and saving them on a floppy disk. You young people won't know what that is. Anyways, sometimes I'd even use my dad's T3200 Toshiba laptop, which was like a tank weighing about 30 pounds. It had a 40 megabyte hard disk. And sometimes I'd use it to connect to a BBS with a modem. 35 years later, I'm still in love with technology. Now that I'm a physician, I've been especially interested in how technology can be leveraged to improve health. I really think technology will one day help us to make better clinical decisions, and I think it will also help our patients better monitor their health. One rheumatologist who always seems to be at the forefront of integrating these novel technologies into his clinical practice is my friend, Dr. Swami Venturapalli. Dr. Venturapalli is the founder of Attune Health. He's Associate Clinical Professor of Medicine at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. He's been involved in dozens of clinical trials, and his current research focuses on using technology, diet, and lifestyle to help patients with autoimmune disease. In this episode, we discuss the latest gadgets that he's using with his patients in clinic, including virtual reality, wearable technology, and social media. He also discussed his productivity secrets and how he's able to see patients and finish the clinic note before the patient even leaves the room. We also talk about the software that is helping him manage his busy clinical practice. If you're at all interested in learning what everybody is going to be doing a few years from now, you got to check out this episode. It was definitely one of the most fun recordings we've done in a while. Enjoy. Swami, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on.
You know, whenever I think about technology, I don't know, I always think about you. And in the times that we've interacted in the past, you have so many things going on as it relates to technology. So I wanted to bring you in here to share a little bit about some of the insights and some of the tools you've been using with technology, especially as it relates to, the care of patients with rheumatology. And I wanted to start off asking you about virtual reality and how virtual reality may have a role in our rheumatology clinics.
Yeah, thanks, John. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thanks so much for inviting me and all of the great introduction and everything. Yeah, I've been dabbling a little bit with virtual reality and thinking about it, and I would say that it's a really expanding field, and I would expand it a little bit more beyond virtual reality now to extended reality, which includes things like augmented reality. There are numerous case uses of virtual reality. In my own clinic, we did a pilot study to assess the feasibility of virtual reality in our patients, rheumatology patients. I think that in our clinics, mainly I look at it as an additional tool for patients to tap into this emotional component of pain that, as you know, is becoming a very important area. Most patients, when I start talking to them about the emotional component of pain, they immediately go back down to, oh, you think it's in my head. And that's not what we're trying to do. But virtual reality gives me a tool to let them explore this connection in a less threatening manner. So in our study, for example, we had our patients try this experience. It's called ease VR, and it's a product that has actually been FDA approved for treatment of low back pain.
Hmm.
Yeah, my clinic, we're doing some research along with my colleague Brennan Spiegel, who's spearheading this whole effort. We have an NIH grant to study virtual reality and this product in particular for back pain. But in rheumatology, I see it being used for chronic pain, central pain syndrome. And the way it works is that in an immersive environment, you're completely taken away from where you're at that particular moment. And it really feels like a different space, time, and it allows you to then be guided into certain meditative or breathing techniques that might help calm your mind.
Hmm.
It takes you out of the moment, and the effects that we're seeing through the research that's been done is really intriguing because novice practitioners of meditation vary from people who've been meditating for many years, but using techniques like virtual reality, you're able to really hack into the brain and achieve some of those same levels of meditative experience that an expert might have.
That's incredible. A couple of things to pick out there. So I totally understand the role of the brain and chronic pain. We actually had Dr. Howard Schubiner here a few episodes ago discuss this. It
Mhm.
was a remarkable episode, and for listeners out there who haven't heard it, I strongly recommend it. It's certainly one of our most popular episodes. And he described, the role that the brain has in interpreting the signals coming from the body. So I can very well imagine how, if the brain is, distracted or immersed in this other world,
Yeah.
it's going to be able to tone down all those signals coming from the body and possibly have a role with pain. And the
Yeah.
other thing that I've heard about and that has been practiced at one of my hospitals is virtual reality as a way of anesthesia. So I know in the emergency department in children, when
Mhm.
they have to, reset a bone or do some sutures,
Correct.
instead of using anesthesia, another option is just putting on these, virtual reality headsets, and then the kids
Yeah.
don't feel anything
Yeah.
while the procedure is being done.
Yeah.
So the power of this, I
Yeah.
totally buy it. I think it's really incredible. What has the patient experience been using this? What do they tell you?
Yeah, just going back to that point, yeah, definitely. I think the kids getting blood draws, for example, maybe using it in an infusion center for a patient who's extremely queasy about getting a blood draw, it kind of takes the
Mm.
pressure off of them. Also, it's not just distraction, but what we're seeing is that we're able to get people to be much more connect deeper with their emotional state through this sort of technique.
Oh, that's interesting.
Our patients generally, the feasibility study is published, and our patients did fine. There were some patients who couldn't handle it. Some people who've got maybe a history of seizures or dizziness and migraine headaches, etc. It's probably not the right technique for them. But most people tolerated our VR experience very well. One comment I'd like to make is that while we talk about technology, I think a sobering realization for me has been that we can't just rely on the technology. We have to program it in a way that there is a human element to it and not lose sight of the human element as we keep focusing on the technological aspects. But it's certainly very exciting. It's a great tool to have, especially in patients who are very complicated, have had chronic pain. We're able to help them see some light at the end of the tunnel, help them gauge that, oh, I can use certain tools that I have at my disposal, which don't involve a medication to control pain. So I think overall, I would say that people tolerate it better. There's some people who are older, maybe technologically a little bit more challenged. They're a little bit more daunted by this. But it's not just about the meditation and the distraction. We're also getting our patients to move. So through gamification, there's all these
Mm.
games where, they might be picking up a ball, so they have to bend and twist. And, it's done in a natural and a graded manner. So we can ease our patients into those sorts of experiences. So
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I never thought about it. Virtual reality as a way to do physical therapy, right?
yeah, absolutely. So that's the use case scenario that's really emerging, rehab. And
Mm.
some of the really interesting work is being done in rehab, actually, through neuro rehab in people who have had strokes. So they've lost complete use of a limb or one side of their body. And there's this concept called mirror therapy that's at the basis of some of these virtual reality experiences, where you basically, through the virtual world, inhabit this body. And in that virtual world, your body, let's say your arm or hand cannot move, but in the virtual world, it can. So you're making many movements which lead to exaggerated movements and gives a lot of feedback. And it's really fascinating how they do it. And I think that's another emerging area. The third area that I think is really cool about virtual reality is trauma therapy. So veterans and people of domestic abuse victims, for example, they're able to potentially stand up against the abuse because they're able to see it in real time in a detached manner. But a fascinating study that really caught my attention was training the abusers to inhabit the role of the abusee and really empathize with that role, because they don't see themselves as abusers. They're just yelling and screaming, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
But when in a virtual world where they're the victim, that sort of empathy transfer, and there's really great work being done in that area too that's fascinating. So I think there's a lot of interesting use cases for virtual reality in the rheumatology space, and it's moving really at a fast clip. So I think we'll be seeing a lot more.
So is it ready for prime time if listeners want to try some virtual reality? Do they go to Best Buy and pick up one of these goggles, or what's the best way of approaching these?
There's the one product that's FDA approved for chronic pain that I'm aware of. There's probably others since I've last looked. It's still not ready to go to Walmart and pick up a VR headset and start working on it. You have to write a prescription. And there are companies out there that have these approvals. And with a prescription, they're able to enter a patient into a cohort that they're starting to give these sets to. In my own clinic, for example, I have a research agreement with one of the companies that I'm working with. And, I refer some of my patients and they are able to access it through this research protocol. But it should be available fairly easily. The company that I work with is called Applied VR. And I think there's other companies out there. So we should be able to get these. These are ready for prime time, especially with the new headsets, which are off the shelf. They're able to be used without any hardware. You just, everything is contained in a headset, basically. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're ready to go plug and play and go for it.
Yeah, I hear that Apple is coming out with a virtual reality headset at some point in the future, which...
Yeah, and I think, the next wave of Facebook and having this metaverse, and that's where this is headed. But I haven't dabbled too much in the metaverse yet, but my sense is that one of our problems in society is that we're so detached from each other and not talking to each other in person. And a concern for me is, hey, if we spend much more time in this virtual world, what does it mean for our day-to-day existence and even our own health? So I think there's some questions as we engage with these very powerful technologies, but there's absolutely no question that these are very powerful technologies that'll have a lot of therapeutic potential as we move forward.
That's great. I can't wait for a world in which I prescribe a patient methotrexate and a VR headset. That's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I think that day is not far. Actually, I do have a few patients that I do that for currently, but I think that where we are doing the research on really is to create some sort of library that's vetted with all the VR content that's out there. For example, if you just Google VR for pain, you'll get like 2,000 different virtual reality videos potentially on the internet, and you don't know which one's actually been tested, which is good, what's not. So creating a library and a pharmacy whereby a physician can then prescribe and say, hey, my patient has anxiety in addition to chronic pain. I would like to have them work on a program that gives them anxiety, but also movement because their back pain is acting up, etc. And they also need, if possible, some sort of empathy training because I'm noticing that this patient is not able to understand how their own emotional health is affecting their pain. So,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this whole topic of like digital prescriptions, right, is really evolving. I know there's also FDA approved games for like ADHD in children.
yes, yes,
So yeah,
absolutely.
that's certainly more to come. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about wearable technology. I mean, I think you're wearing a watch that I'm sure, tells your heart rate and stuff.
Yeah.
Are you doing anything with wearable tech in your rheumatology clinic or with your patients?
So it's still in the research realm. I have my patients reporting some of the wearable data, and I have found it to be very helpful actually. So some of my patients with POTS, for example,
Mm,
they're able to correlate certain activities and certain trends that they have noticed about their own fluid intake or their stress levels and correlated with their heart rates. Another area of interest of mine is working on diets and inflammation. And in that context, we've piloted some work with CGM devices, the continuous glucose monitoring devices.
mm,
And I found them really insightful. And when patients see that, let's say they ate a heavy pasta meal or something like that in the evening, they're able to see their sugar spike 6 hours later. And then they're also able to correlate that with bad sleep that
mm,
occurred that particular night or more vivid dreams or nightmares, etc. And those sorts of insights are powerful for changing habits and for changing lifestyle. So
mm.
I think there's a huge role for wearable technology. As you know, I think you mentioned you were training for triathlon and you found some of those insights that you got from CGM, etc., quite helpful.
Right.
And similarly, I'm seeing that in my patients as well. And a lot of this wearable technology now, you can actually monitor stress over a period of time through galvanic skin monitors that, even this Fitbit device that I'm wearing is able to do it. The Apple
Mm.
Watches, of course, do it as well. You're checking heart rate variability, getting reminders to breathe, take a break, walk around. So I think there's a lot of potential here. The other area that they might be helpful in is in enhancing our own outcome measures. So, patient reported outcome measures with continuous monitoring
Mm.
in between visits, that likely is going to improve our ability to understand what's going on with our patients in between visits. And potentially, the holy grail is obviously predicting flares of our diseases and being able to act on them before they actually happen. And I think that that's research that's being conducted currently by numerous people in our field. Jeff Curtis has been doing a fair amount of research with wearable devices and technology. So I think there's a lot more to come.
Yeah, I think the potential is seems to me infinite. I think the complicating aspect is that we're collecting so much information and being able to distill it and understand it in a simple manner. I think still is sort of the challenge of this.
Yeah, I agree. It's a challenge, and I think that that's an area of actual research that's ongoing in AI to be able to make sense of these connections, right?
Yeah.
And I guess that's a great segue to AI, which is another technology topic. It's a little scary, but at the same time, it's so powerful. And it's amazing how some of the new AI technology that's available can really replicate a lot of our day to day activities. You're all familiar, I'm sure, about Chat GPT by now. And some of the text that's coming out of Chat GPT, you just put in a question, and the text that it pours out is just unbelievable. It's like written so amazingly well. And I can see a lot of use case scenarios for it. But on the other hand, I'm also a little worried about misuse case scenarios of this sort of technology. So,
Swami, I have a confession to make about ChatGPT. So, when I interviewed Dan Kastner on our show, I
yeah,
was trying to come up with questions like, what should I ask Dan Kastner?
right.
Guess what I did?
What did you
I
do?
went to ChatGPT And I asked it, I'm doing a podcast with Dan Kastner. What questions should I ask him? And
Uh-huh.
it came out with 10 questions, many of which I actually asked him. It was
Unbelievable.
remarkable.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. I can see it also the use, for instance, write a letter for medical necessity for, for my patient to get rituximab or
Yes.
something like
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
for
Yeah.
rheumatoid arthritis.
Absolutely.
Boom, right? It writes it. It's
Yeah, it summarizes all the studies and it gives you a very coherent argument. And, I mean, it gets it wrong maybe a little bit, but that's where we still need to tweak it. But what I'm hearing on the other side is that the insurance companies are catching up to this and they're kind of having a counter messaging of some sort. So, so it's going to be fascinating how this all plays out.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, I think the potential is also incredible, but as you mentioned before, everything comes with sort of a negative aspect. I know a lot of teachers and educators out there are really concerned about VR because you could ask VR to write a 5-page essay about the American Revolution
yeah,
and boom, you have it, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
And so, I know that educators are trying to figure out, well, how can we change our assignments to make sure that it's the student that's actually doing the work
Correct.
instead of
Yeah,
these, AI machines.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of philosophical questions by AI that are posed by AI that we need to answer. And the pace at which change is occurring is actually phenomenal, but also a little scary in this regard. I mean, I think we're seeing from big technology companies and how much information they have on us. They're listening to us. They're recording it. They're analyzing it. They're creating specific tools to identify who's vulnerable to a sale and using that against us. So,
Yep.
I think that there are a lot of questions, and I'm hoping that as a society, we're able to engage with those questions and in real time. And as policymakers, I'm hoping that they're able to come up with some sort of framework. It seems so disjointed and everyone's so divided, but this is an area that we need to unite on and figure out what the way forward is.
Yeah. Great. Let's switch a little bit talking about social media. And I want to sort of ask you two questions. What's your take on social media personally, especially as it relates to learning about rheumatology,
Yeah.
especially with all the
Yeah.
mess about Twitter?
Yeah.
And secondly, social media use in rheumatology and by patients.
I mean, listen, the pandemic was a giant experiment in a way and highlighted for me the power of social media. I mean, I got so much information in real time on Twitter. And the problem is, how do you sort out the incredible amount of noise and the bots putting out information versus real content? I found that following a few people who I really respect and following the content that they're highlighting and seeing who they're following and what they're talking about was incredibly useful. I was able to keep up to date on COVID. You were part of that whole global rheumatology alliance, and sad to see Phil Robinson's passing. He was amazing, and that community that formed almost instantaneously around Twitter for me was emblematic of how social media can be a force for good.
Yep.
I really think that if we use it like any tool, it needs to be used well by the humans behind it, and it can be very powerful. Obviously, there are toxic conversations going on Twitter all the time, and I try not to engage with them or focus too much on that. And it does need some management in that sense and some discipline not to engage with some of the negative content that's going on. But I'm learning a lot. I mean, I follow some people who put out high quality information, and it's scientifically validated. The noise factor is important because everybody's now become an expert. So, sorting through that is definitely an issue. We published our pilot study of how to use Twitter for research, actually, in rheumatology. And our paper was published, I think, within the last couple of years, where we did a thematic analysis of sentiments expressed by lupus patients and their family members on Twitter. And it was quite fascinating because I think patients are obviously using social media. It may be Twitter, maybe Facebook, maybe Reddit, maybe something else, and they're getting information there. They have support
Yep.
groups online. And being able to tap into what they're talking about and understand it, and then direct our own research efforts towards what's important for patients, for me is a great idea, and I think should be pursued. And I think we did this pilot work and published it, and so it's definitely feasible, and research, meaningful research, can be done on social media, and I think it'll inform what our research priorities should be.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful, Swami. I think I've also done work on social media.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, we did a study about parents of kids with rheumatic diseases,
Yeah.
and virtually every single one of them has used Facebook to learn about, their child's
Yeah.
medical condition and connect with other families. At the same time, we've all seen the damage that misinformation has created, when social media, as it relates to, for instance, COVID vaccines,
Yeah.
that it was perceived to be unsafe, and sort of that message really took off
Right.
in social media. So again, as with everything, there's some really good things that have occurred with
Yeah.
social media, but again, it comes with some baggage, and we
Yeah.
just sort of ourselves, and we have to help our patients disentangle those two things, and
Yeah.
try to get away from sort
Yeah.
of the negativity. And
I mean, a word on these controversies, right? I mean, misinformation, it's a loaded term because I think the pandemic has exposed some of these issues and brought them to the fore. And I definitely am in favor of open dialogue. It's hard with all the noise on Twitter to sort through all the negative stuff that's going on. But I'm a big proponent of open speech, listening to what people are saying, even if we don't agree with their points of view, having a civil discourse, and hopefully we'll find a way to do that. But I definitely think this is so powerful and ingrained into our society at the moment that we need to engage with it as rheumatologists.
yeah, I totally agree. And, we got to sort of go where the money is, right? So patients are spending time in social media. So we have to, I think, have a presence and certainly provide some guidelines to our patients about this is where you can find reliable information. These are reliable patient support groups. These are reliable organizations and things like that
Yes.
to help them,
Yeah.
sort it out. Great. So, Swami, before starting this discussion, I was telling you that I had just spent the last couple of hours trying to finish my clinic notes from yesterday, and I'm still not
Yeah.
done. And it was
Yeah.
remarkable to hear that you finish most of your clinic notes as the patient walks out of the room. Can you tell me a little bit about how you're using technology within your practice to be more efficient?
Yeah, listen, John, I guess necessity is the mother of invention, as somebody said. So, being in a busy clinical practice, I've got to keep moving. My goal when I go in with a patient is to spend as much face-to-face time with the patient directly, right? And I've found voice activated software, dictation software to be extremely helpful. And the important thing is that I've been using Dragon since I would say 2008 or so, and it's really improved tremendously. Dragon Medical One, which interfaces directly with Epic, which is the EMR system that I'm using, it's become so good that it's at least 99% effective and I'm speaking at a really fast clip, much faster than I'm speaking even now. And what I do is I talk to my patients. I understand what's going on. I have the chart open, obviously. I, order labs or whatever is needed. But after doing all the clinical work, I tell the patient, listen, I'm going to speak to my phone, and it's going to capture our encounter as I see it. Please let me know if I captured something incorrectly, and I will correct it right now and deal with it. And it seems to help patients really understand how I am interpreting what they have come to me with and create a plan of action for them. And it's not uncommon for a patient to say, hey, no, you got that wrong. Actually, my fever started 7 days ago, not 3 days ago, or whatever. And I just correct it because we want to be as accurate as possible. And so by the end of that encounter, I have this dictated. It's already done, and all I have to do is copy paste it into the correct section of my note, and plan's done, and we're out. So I embrace it. It's improved my efficiency tremendously. I think patients like the fact that I'm talking to them and with them and focused on them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I use the phone rather than sit behind my computer hiding my face. So I find that to be one of the most productive tools. It comes with a little bit of control needing to be let go. If you're the kind that needs 100% accuracy, yeah, you're going to have to type it out
Mm-hmm.
yourself and reread it. But you can always proof whatever goes on. I have a little bit less of a standard there, I would say. So, everyone has to adapt it to their own
Mm-hmm.
use case. But that's how I use that specific thing. And I get, a little bit more efficient that way.
Got it. So practically speaking, do you really use it on your phone? You pull up the Dragon One medical
Yeah.
software on your phone.
Yeah.
Tell me, how do you document the exam, for instance?
Yeah, so same thing. I mean, it's actually you click on Haiku, Epic Haiku, which is the app-based version of Epic.
Yep.
And in there's a button where you can start recording into the chart. I created a note on my computer, which has all my templated stuff. And then I just dictate my exam. So I dictate the subjective portion, I dictate the exam portion, which is relevant to what the complaint is, and then the assessment and plan
Hmm.
right there. And I just cut paste into the relevant section of my note and finish it off. And, the plan section goes into the patient follow up, the patients get a printout
Mm-hmm.
when they leave. And the plan that I dictate goes in there, and it has a follow up and all the steps that they need to do and all the referrals that they're getting. And they're leaving with a document that has all of those plans, and they have full access to read my note, but they've also listened as I was dictating.
That's incredible, man. I'm certainly going to try that out this afternoon. I'm going to pull
Good.
out my phone and see how it goes. I'll report back to all
Yes,
of you
please
and
do.
let you know
Yeah.
my adventures with Dragon Medical One during a
Do it.
medical encounter.
I can't live without it now.
Great. And I know that in addition to being a clinician, you actually have your own private practice. And how do you try to leverage technology to make that work more efficiently?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm not the best at business, but what I've invested in, a colleague of mine, Ami Ben Artsy, shout out to him, has created this awesome software where it's a business financial software for physicians, and
Hmm.
basically it's collecting data from my billing system and collecting data from my bank,
Hmm.
and it's collecting data from the EMR as well, and it's basically putting it all together and giving me meaningful reports where I could generate a report. For example, Prolia, it's a osteoporosis drug that we give every 6 months. There's a patient who is, let's say, lost to follow-up, and I can quickly look and run a report through this software and get an analysis of, hey, there are 10 patients that were missed this week. Now, EMRs can do that, obviously, but the beauty of this particular software is that connects all the three systems that are essential for a practice, which are basically the billing software, your banking, because what comes in from the billing software, this can reconcile it with, hey, did the money actually come in when the billing software said that it was supposed to have come in, or did something happen?
Hmm.
Somebody did not take the cash the check, or somebody cashed the check in somebody's their own account or something like that. So I've invested in this. We're experimenting with it, but I think that's an innovation, I would say, that I'm really enjoying, and hopefully it'll pay off.
Yeah. So is that software available for any practice to download, or is it something custom built for you?
It's currently in beta testing. I'm a beta test site for it
Hmm.
in my
Got
practice.
it.
And, I would say stay tuned. I'll probably tweet about it once it's all the kinks have been ironed out. And then, Ben Artsy it's his software. So he's definitely interested in expanding it and getting it to other people. But that's one. And there's other systems out there. I've spoken with other colleagues in practice, and there's other systems, and there's other groups doing similar stuff. So I think that's one innovation in running a practice that I've found to be very helpful. And there's a lot more, but I think from a tech perspective, that's the thing I'm most excited about.
Very cool. The last thing I wanted to touch on was sort of the American College of Rheumatology. I know that you're part of the board, right?
Yes, I
This
am.
sort of nebulous group of people that rule the kingdom of ACR.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, with your tech background and all the innovations that you've brought into your practice with patients, your office, what sort of suggestions have you thought about that can help, bring our community closer, or that could help us all, especially as it relates to technology?
Yeah. Hey, we all love the ACR. We've all had these amazing moments in time where we've connected with colleagues across the nation. We've had people help us out in our careers. Let's say we're hitting a wall in our own institutions, you're able to reach across, and the ACR provides that forum. The board, I don't know how nebulous it is. I think the ACR needs to do a better job of making it open and transparent. It really is a representation of the general membership. And they have private practice folks, they have pediatrics folks, they have ARP folk, and people who have generally volunteered and understand what the ACR is about and how it's run. And we all get together, and I think under the leadership of Doug White, who's really trying to expand our connection with members that are diverse in many different ways, in different practice settings, in different ways that they do things. And one of the charges was, hey, how do we connect with everybody? We have this amazing meeting once a year. We have great content, but it's beyond a paywall. It's hard to access. It's not easily searchable. So the things that
Right.
we've talked about at length, and I'm hoping to be able to bring this to fruition very soon, is to be able to access our content through some sort of either a website, which is a portal, and that logs all of your activities for education. But beyond that, we've seen from the Global Rheumatology Alliance and other groups that have gotten together in quick time that there is a real thirst for a community. There's Facebook groups, there's all kinds of other groups that people are part of. And if the ACR, given how unbiased it is and the great catchment of a very diverse group of rheumatologists, not just in the US, but globally, if we can be that hub for information, both education, but also a community of support, that would be awesome. So the ACR has
Mm.
a strategic plan that we just, Evelyn Shee and I were the co-chairs of that group that involved a very diverse group of ACR members. One of the areas that we really emphasized was we want to connect with that young rheumatologist. We want to be where everybody is. So the ACR is where you are was kind of the hallmark or the central theme
Mm.
of that strategic plan. And the persona that we really wanted to connect with was that rheumatologist in, let's say, rural California or Kansas or wherever, who was seeing a very sick patient and needed help. And they were able to connect through an ACR portal app or website or whatever, ask their question, and 100 people, including some of the world's experts, reach out to them and say, yeah, this is what I would do. This is what, hey, this is how I think you should proceed, etc. So that was the idea behind what we were trying to achieve. And the ACR is taking this very seriously at the board level. There's a lot of movement towards this. And I'm hoping that it comes to fruition. So I think technology will play a big role in that.
Yeah, that sounds great. I know in pediatrics, at least, there's a famous list serve that goes across many pediatric rheumatologists throughout the country or the world, where people do that. They ask questions about complicated patients and they get answers. And I totally agree with you. That would be incredible, for the ACR to
Yeah.
have something like a Slack channel,
Yeah.
for instance.
Yeah.
And you could have, different channels of pediatric
Correct.
rheumatology, adult rheumatology, gout, rheumatoid arthritis,
Right.
where people can, enter in their questions,
Yeah.
comments, things that they've found interesting. And, not only to help take care of our patients, but also, like you mentioned, to build that sense of community.
Yeah.
That, even though I'm here in rural Minnesota or whatever, I'm connected to everybody else
Correct.
within the ACR and they have my back.
Yes.
That would be really powerful.
Yeah. No, I think that's an idea that I'm hoping the board can achieve over the next few years, because it's a critical element. We started off some of these pilot programs at Convergence as a community hubs, which you may have been part of.
Yeah.
That's the concept. The community hub, instead of it being for 3 days at the ACR, lives on throughout the year and really allows for great exchange of ideas and a online home for people to engage with.
Yeah, I think that sounds brilliant. Swami, this has been a wonderful conversation. I love your ideas. I hope that you keep on innovating, and I hope to bring you back so that you can report on, many other things that you've done in the meantime. Thank you so much for your time.
John, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, and this was a great chat, and good luck on the podcast and everything else you're doing.
Well, there you have it. Thank you all for listening, downloading, subscribing to our show, and for rating us with 5 stars, or however many stars you think we deserve. You can find our show notes for this episode at acronair.org, and also on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, and on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, keep your software and hardware up to date, and of course, stay healthy.